time once again for CU Immigration here on WRFU LP Urbana, 104.5 FM and UPTV. I will be your host for this evening. My name is Mr. Garza, and I'm here to let you know that WRFU is an open forum for the Urbana-Champaign community. Views expressed are those of the speakers and are not intended to represent WRFU or UCIMC, or, as we like to say on the televised version of this show, UPTV. These views are our own, and by our, in this instance, I mean me, myself, and I, the three of us. So, hello again and welcome. As I said, I'm once again from home. I don't know if I'm ever going back into the studio. I might someday if all the viruses go away, and it's a lot easier than sitting here. Well, I don't know if it's easier because there I have to bring cameras and tripods and all these things and set up. Here I just, I take the easy way out. I just press record on a video on my computer and audio, and there I go. So it's pretty simple. I can just come in here, sit down and do this for an hour and then go away. If you just ignore all of the editing and all that sort of thing that I also have to do. But be that as it may, more immigration stuff. I'm going to start out today's. I don't know that I have a theme. A theme may present itself as I go along. Sometimes that works out that way. I'll collect a group of stories that seem interesting to me, and it isn't until I'm about partway through that I realize I have a theme here. Other times it's just random stuff. It's about immigration, but it's not any particular angle or approach to it. It's just, here's what's going on in immigration these days, or lately, or right now, or today even. So I don't know. We'll see if a theme emerges. There's always something in there. There's some thread that connects these stories that I choose, as opposed to the stories that I go, I don't think that's as important. So perhaps that thread will reveal itself to me as I'm reading, or perhaps it will not, and it will just remain a mystery. Who knows? Anyway, this article that I'm going to start with is entitled License to Live. Florida quietly changed driver's license requirements for immigrants. Tens of thousands of undocumented immigrants who have been able to drive legally in Florida may be unable to get driver's licenses again after the state quietly changed its identification requirements for obtaining licenses. In mid-May, the Florida Department of Highway Safety and Motor Vehicles tightened its document requirements that outline what some immigrants must provide in order to get their driver's licenses. It's the most striking change of at least 6 that have been made in the past 6 months, making it almost impossible for people who are in the deportation process to legally drive, something they have been able to do before, according to internal documents obtained by the Miami Herald. Before May 11th, people with pending deportation hearings were able to get a driver's license as long as they had a court document proving they had a future hearing date. Now, when applying for or renewing a license, which for immigrants could be valid anywhere from 1 to 4 years, they need to present an unexpired passport and an I-94 form, the federal document proving they entered the U.S. legally. The problem? The majority of people in deportation proceedings did not enter the country legally. Though the Executive Order Office for Immigration Review, a sub-agency of the U.S. Department of Justice, whose chief function is to conduct removal proceedings in immigration courts, does not keep data for how many people enter the country legally versus illegally, immigration lawyers and experts across the state and country say most of their undocumented clients in deportation entered the country without inspection, without checking in at a port of entry. As of June 2020, there were at least 120,000 people in deportation proceedings for the fiscal year in Florida, and more than 1.2 million across the country, government data shows. There is currently no data on how many of those people are unlicensed. Deportation proceedings almost always drag on for years, and in some instances they can take a decade. The new requirement shows that the government is alienating those who are in removal proceedings, said Elizabeth Ricci, who is liaison with the DMV for the Central Florida chapter of the American Immigration Lawyers Association. Traditionally, if you were in removal in Florida, you could get a license with no problem, as long as you had a hearing date scheduled. However, now the government is discriminating against an entire category of applicants. Ricci, a longtime immigration law expert, said the documents they are requesting are prohibitive. Most people who are in the deportation process did not enter the country legally, which is why they are in deportation proceedings in the first place, she added. This is an extraordinary impediment for a very large group of people in our country, a group of hardworking people who need to drive in order to work and put food on the table. The abrupt change to the DMV's acceptable documents table, the internal documents the state gives to staffers at local DMV offices that serves as their official guide to what the current license requirements are, comes at a time when the Trump administration has continued its efforts to severely limit immigration during a global health pandemic. Some other changes that have occurred since February include stricter rules on what documents will be accepted from TPS holders, Dreamers, refugees, and Cubans who file under the Cuban Adjustment Act when applying for identification at local licensing offices. DMV officials denied that there was any change, instead saying that the state updated the internal document in order to be more compliant with the federal Real ID Act. The law, which Florida has adhered to since 2010, establishes security standards for license issuance and production. When it initially passed in 2005, it was designed to keep U.S. citizens from holding multiple licenses and social security numbers, and to allow government officials to check immigration standing. So far, 26 states have adopted it. The DMV would not disclose exactly how and why the change came about, and would not say whether or not the requirement change was a result of a directive from the governor or the president. Neither the Department of Homeland Security nor Governor Ron DeSantis' office responded to the Herald's request seeking comment. Aaron Keller, Director of Communications for the Florida Department of Highway Safety and Motor Vehicles, said that these federal guidelines have always required the validation of both lawful presence and identity before a driver's license is issued, hence the need for an I-94 and valid passport. But that's not true, according to the law and national immigration experts who specialized in the Real ID Act. Jackie Vimo, a political analyst who leads the National Immigration Law Center's driver's license policy work and heads the center's economic justice program, said the federal law only lists minimum standards and does not require a specific set of documents. She said whatever documents a state requires is discretionary and is negotiated with the Department of Homeland Security on a state-by-state basis. There is no such thing as being more compliant. You're either compliant or not compliant, Vimo said. Florida has been Real ID compliant for a decade, which means DHS accepted their prior list of documents as meeting their minimum standards. If the DMV is saying that it requires an I-94, it's not how Real ID works. According to Real ID Act, an I-94 is just one of many documents an immigrant can use to prove they have lawful presence in the U.S. Other acceptable documents include work authorization cards, and prior to May 11th, according to Florida DMV records obtained by the Herald, included proof of a future hearing, which serves as an acknowledgement that the government is aware of the immigrant's presence. The federal law also says that states are not required to comply with these requirements when issuing Real ID driver's licenses. Though states don't have to comply with the standards, there are some consequences, including the inability to use the driver's license as official identity documents when boarding a plane. Seems like the personnel at the DMV are being forced to act as immigration agents under the cover of state law, said Joel Caminero, Caminero, yeah. An immigration attorney based in Orlando. It's overreaching, making things harder for people who have lived here for a long time and who have driven for a very long time. Michael Gold, a Tallahassee immigration lawyer who began his practice in 1986 on the streets of Miami-Dade County, echoed Caminero. This was just invented now. Florida is getting creative, he said. It's disingenuous to say that an I-94 has always been required, Gold said. My clients have never had to provide it. Miguel Hernandez was one of them. Hernandez, who provided a notice to appear along with a bank credit card that sported his photo on it, said he had no issue getting a license back in February. It was easy. All my friends who were on the same boat as me have licenses, he said. The explanation that the DMV provided to the Herald contradicts its own website, which says an I-94 is just one of several documents the undocumented person can provide to obtain a driver's license. DMV officials told the Herald that an acceptable documents table does not and was not created to address every possible scenario, procedure, or policy for the issuance of a driver's license or ID. The Driver License Operations Manual, and not the Acceptable Documents Table, is the definitive procedure document used by staff for the issuance of a driver's license. But that's news to Ricci, as well as two former top DMV officials that served on the department's legal counsel. Quote, in all my years, the table was the go-to, not an operations manual, said one of the former officials, who asked for anonymity due to their position at another government office. In regards to the change in requirements, there has to be a mechanism to make that happen. When I was at the department a few years ago, we did not make changes to the accepted documents table unless there was a change in the law or a directive from the governor's office or the president. Said Ricci, so if the DMV says it's always required an I-94, does that mean it's been issuing licenses in error all this time? When the Herald asked, the DMV did not comment. Ricci added, it's interesting that they provide a secret list for DMV employees inside and another set for the public to see, Ricci said. The list used to be online years ago, and now it's not. According to the second former DMV lawyer, the acceptable documents table was always online, but it was at some point within the last 3 years taken down. Records obtained by the Herald show that the DMV has barred immigration lawyers across the state from sharing the new table, which is given to the American Immigration Lawyers Association every time it's tweaked. However, the document comes with a warning. Quote, this document may not be shared outside of AILA without permission from the Florida Department of Highway Safety and Motor Vehicles, end quote. Lawyers say they've been told that any sharing of the document would result in the possible termination of the relationship between AILA and the DMV. DMV officials did not comment on why the department doesn't want immigration lawyers sharing the document, but said in an email that the table is a public record and would be provided to anyone who asks for it. Yeah. Well, it's really hard not to comment as I go along here because there's a lot of weird stuff in here. Okay. The Herald interviewed 3 DMV managers in South Florida in July who agreed to interviews under the condition of anonymity because of fear of retribution by the state. Ooh. We've turned lots of people away in the last 2 months. Lots, one supervisor said. It's been frustrating on both ends to have to explain to people, even asylum seekers, that if they would have come in April, they would have been able to get a license. I sound like a broken record. Another manager referred to the acceptable documents table as our Bible. It's what we use to determine who gets a license, the second lead staffer said. I've never referred to a manual for that. The table is our manual. A third manager said, the government has recently changed the rules because of fraud. Some people were coming in with doctored court notices, so they changed the document requirements, the manager said, who noted that on that day, the office turned away 6 people. For one 33-year-old Mexican national who lives in Central Florida, a driver's license means more than taking a joyride. For me, it's about going to work and providing for my wife and 3 children, said the immigrant, who asked not to be named because of his status. He said he's been living in the U.S. for 18 years and driving for about 15. In early June, he was arrested by local police in North Florida for driving without a license. After being booked, the jail called U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, which later transferred him into ICE detention. I drove for a long time without a license because I was scared that my information would be shared with ICE, he said after being released on bond. But since I was pulled over and arrested, and now I'm in deportation proceedings, my lawyer told me I didn't have to drive in secret anymore, that I qualified for a license because I have proof being acknowledged by the court. But it didn't pan out that way. He was turned away last week at the DMV. A Mexican national who was turned away at a local DMV said staffers told him he no longer qualifies for a license. Obtained by the Miami Herald, Neil Rambana, an immigration lawyer based in Tallahassee who once served as a congressional liaison for AILA, said what Florida is doing is creating a dangerous precedent. All this is doing is forcing people to drive without permission, without insurance, therefore putting themselves and others in danger, he said. It's also an easy way for the administration to almost guarantee the more people would end up in ICE detention and ultimately in line to be deported. According to state law, driving without a license is a second-degree misdemeanor that could result in a fine as large as $500 and up to 60 days in jail. If detained by one of the 48 police departments ICE has an agreement with, the individual could be transferred to ICE detention. Meanwhile, the Mexican construction worker who was turned away said the situation isn't unfortunate, it's catastrophic. How am I supposed to feed my family if I can't drive to work? My heart sank when they told me the rules changed, he told the Herald during a FaceTime interview as he held up a copy of the new acceptable documents table a DMV employee gave him. I don't drive, but sometimes I go for milk for my baby boy. I have to hide to make sure they don't catch me and stop me because they see a Latino at the steering wheel. I may sound dramatic to many because for them it's just a license to drive, he said as he left Walmart with 2 bags of formula for his toddler. But for me, it's a license to live. So, we went through this a while back here in Illinois when we were fighting to get licenses for undocumented immigrants. And actually New York just finally, believe it or not, managed to do the same thing there too. But the point of all of this is that a license to drive is merely a statement that you are capable of operating a motor vehicle. It is merely proof that you've undergone some tests and that you can be considered to be a driver in good standing, let's say. Someone who has proven that they're able to drive, they know the rules of the road, and that's it. That's all a driver's license should be. And it should be available to anyone. Now, I get that a lot of people use licenses as an ID, and therefore it is very important that the people getting licenses be able to prove who they are, so that I just can't go and get a license for Donald Duck and I'm Donald Duck the driver, even though Donald Duck is a perfectly good driver. The license being used as an identification for something else, there is a tricky dynamic at play there, but that's only because we tend to use driver's licenses as kind of a state ID, not because the function of a license itself changes depending on whether you admit who you are or just make something up. So I think I get it in the sense of using a license as proof of identity, that there have to be more stringent requirements for that aspect of it. But using a license just to prove you can drive should only be related to your ability to drive and nothing else. So what most of this seems to me to be just another way of harassing immigrants and making them uncomfortable and making life here unbearable for them. And that's all it seems to be. And the fact that it's Florida, a state with a governor who is hardly any better than the president himself, is pretty much proof, I would say, that that's where the directive came from, and that's what the point of it is. It's just to harass immigrants and make them feel unwelcome and be unwelcome. Make them unwelcome, not just feel unwelcome, but be unwelcome. So I think it's very sad. There's just really, I guess I'll say it now, it's August. In November, there's an election coming up. We really have to get out and vote. And we really need to make sure that there's a big change. Because until there is, and until these people are removed from power, they're going to keep doing things like this. That's their whole point in seeking power, is to impose their sort of, well, I'm trying to think of another word than racist, but it's racist. Well, that's weird. My video recording every now and then just stops for no particular reason. And then I have to restart it. And when I restart it, it looks completely different. I don't get it. Anyway, but along that line of thought, I thought I would read this next article because it sort of addresses what the future might hold, or what the future does hold, possibly. It's entitled, "Trump and Biden Take Sharply Different Paths on Immigration." Hopefully so. So U.S. President Trump's push to crack down on illegal immigration and reshape legal immigration was the heart of the Republicans' winning 2016 campaign, and has remained at the forefront of his White House agenda. Okay, that's really weird. All right, I'm just going to let it go because I don't like the way that's worded, but that's news writers speak, so I'll let it bypass. So anyway, former Vice President Joe Biden, the likely Democratic challenger in this year's presidential election, promises to rescind many of the policies put in place by Trump administration and instead advance his own platform if he wins on November 3rd. Here is a look at some of their immigration stances. Coronavirus immigration restrictions. Trump has dramatically curtailed immigration and travel into the United States during the coronavirus pandemic, arguing the steps were needed for health reasons and to protect jobs for U.S. workers in the face of high unemployment. During the pandemic, Trump has restricted the entry of many foreign workers and immigrants seeking green cards for permanent residency. Biden tweeted at the time that Trump was banning immigrants to distract from his administration's pandemic response, and that immigrants help grow our economy and create jobs. Trump also implemented a public health emergency policy that allows U.S. officials to rapidly deport migrants caught at the U.S.-Mexico border, including unaccompanied minors and asylum seekers, bypassing standard legal processes. Biden has said he will pause deportations for 100 days after taking office, but his campaign did not comment on the coronavirus-related border rules. When the Trump administration announced plans in July to restrict the entry of some foreign students to the United States, a policy it later had to rescind, Biden tweeted support for international students, saying they bring innovation to the country. That's not really comparing platforms very well, but it gives you sort of a general idea where the candidates stand. Okay, Dreamers. The Supreme Court ruled in June against Trump's 2017 decision to end the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, or DACA, program, which protects from deportation immigrants popularly known as Dreamers, who were brought to the United States as children and have remained in the country illegally. The High Court's ruling, which found Trump's termination of the program was arbitrary and capricious, left the administration the option to try again to end it. The Trump administration issued a memo in July that clamped down on DACA, blocking new enrollment and allowing only renewals that last 1 year. Oh, only renewals that last 1 year. Not that last 1 year. Not the other last year, but the last 1 year. Anyway, sorry. Last 1 year. That last for 1 year, I guess I would say. Less than the current 2-year period. Launched by then President Barack Obama in 2012, DACA grants deportation relief and work permits to about 644,000, mostly Hispanic, young adults, but does not provide them a path to citizenship. Biden said he would reverse Trump's cruel decision and strengthen protection for Dreamers. He said he would make Dreamers eligible for federal student aid for college and would back legislation that provides a path to citizenship for them as part of efforts to do so for all of the estimated 11 million immigrants living in the country illegally, including those who did not arrive as children. Trump's administration has prioritized arresting immigration violators regardless of their criminal histories or length of time in the United States. U.S.-Mexico border wall. Oh, what a silly thing. Trump's promises to build a wall along the southwest border and to force Mexico to pay for it were the centerpiece of his hardline immigration rhetoric during the 2016 campaign, energizing his supporters and enraging Democrats. The administration has completed 265 miles of border wall with a goal of 450 miles by the end of the year, but nearly all of those barriers replaced existing structures, according to U.S. border officials. Mexico has refused to pay for any of the construction, leaving the U.S. government to foot the bill, partially with billions of dollars in Pentagon funds. Federal court records show the Trump administration has ramped up efforts to seize more land for the barrier. Biden said last week that he would not tear down border walls built under Trump, but would stop construction. Biden's immigration plan would end the diversion of Pentagon funding to build the wall and focus instead on border enforcement like investments in improving the screening infrastructure at ports of entry. Family separations. Trump's 2018 zero-tolerance policy to prosecute illegal border crossings led to several thousand children being forcibly separated from parents and legal guardians detained on Mexico border. The policy, described by the administration as a deterrent, sparked outrage, and the backlash led Trump to sign an executive order to end the practice. But the administration continued to separate hundreds of kids traveling with other adult relatives. Biden would end the prosecution of parents for minor immigration violations, which he calls an intimidation tactic, and make it priority to reunite any children still separated from their families. Travel ban. Trump signed an order banning entry to immigrants from 7 Muslim-majority countries, a move Biden and other critics said discriminated against Muslims. A federal court blocked the initial ban, but in 2018 the Supreme Court upheld an amended version that has since been expanded to other countries. The version upheld by the Supreme Court places restrictions on travelers from 5 majorly Muslim nations: Iran, Libya, Somalia, Syria, and Yemen. North Korea and Venezuela also face visa bars, but those measures affect relatively few travelers. Trump placed restrictions on 6 additional countries in January, including Nigeria and 3 other African nations.